The sweltering heat of late afternoon pressed against the windows of Suds and Duds, the city's most forgettable laundromat. Outside, the temperature had climbed to 97 degrees, but inside, thanks to the combined efforts of 8 dryers running simultaneously, it felt like the inside of a toaster oven. A handful of battered washing machines stood in a tired row, their white enamel yellowed with age, looking like the weathered teeth of an old boxer who'd seen too many fights. Ethan Myers shifted his weight from one foot to another, watching the timer on machine number 9 tick down with agonizing slowness. He was thinking about stale vending machine cookies, not cosmic destiny. The meager pile of quarters in his palm represented the sad remainder of his liquid assets until payday, and the curry-stained clothes tumbling in the washer represented the sum total of his wearable wardrobe. 3 more minutes, he muttered to himself, glancing at his phone. Just enough time to... The fluorescent lights flickered, just for a second. No one else seemed to notice the elderly man dozing in the plastic chair by the window didn't stir, and the college student with headphones remained absorbed in her textbook. But Ethan felt it like the world had hiccuped. Machine 7, empty and unused, suddenly hummed to life for exactly 2 seconds before falling silent again. Ethan frowned. A soft, almost musical hum hung in the air, vibrating at a frequency that made his molars ache. He shook his head to clear it, attributing the sensation to hunger heat, or the mind-numbing boredom of watching clothes spin. Quarters, he reminded himself, turning toward the change machine. Focus on quarters. The door to the laundromat swung open with a cheerful jangle that belied the existential weight of the moment. Ethan didn't look up immediately. When he did, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She stood just inside the doorway, tall, impossibly elegant, with close-cropped silver hair that matched the color of her fitted jumpsuit. The material wasn't quite leather, wasn't quite metal, but something in between that caught the light like the scales of a fish. Her eyes were the deep blue of twilight, with an unsettling vertical pupil that expanded slightly as she surveyed the room. Ethan stared. He couldn't help it. In the dingy laundromat with its linoleum floor and buzzing lights, she looked like a sculpture made of mercury that had somehow come to life. The woman, if that's what she was, moved with fluid grace toward him. Not toward the empty machines, not toward the vending area. Directly to where he stood at machine 9. "You're using the wrong setting," she said, her voice carrying a faint accent he couldn't place, like Swedish, but with more music to it. Without asking permission, she reached past him and adjusted the dial from normal to delicate. "I what?" Ethan stammered. "Cotton polyester blend, 30% curry, turmeric staining water hardness of 142 ppm in this district," she said, matter-of-factly. "Delicate cycle cold water, double rinse. Otherwise, the cumin molecules will bond permanently to the fibers." Ethan clutched his quarters tighter. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "You're 4 minutes late." "Late for what? I don't even know you." Instead of answering, she turned on her heel. The dryer door of the machine next to his slammed shut with a metallic bang, though no one had touched it. When Ethan looked back, the silver woman was gone. The bell above the door hadn't jingled. Ethan stood frozen, a sock dangling from his fingertips. He glanced around the dozing man, the student, the rumbling machines, all unchanged. Had he hallucinated the entire encounter? His phone vibrated in his pocket. When he pulled it out, the clock had jumped backward by exactly 4 minutes. "What the hell?" he whispered, a chill running down his spine despite the laundromat's oppressive heat. He was still staring at the impossible time display when his washer buzzed completion, right on schedule, or perhaps 4 minutes ahead. For the next 3 days, Ethan tried to convince himself that the silver woman had been a stress-induced hallucination. He'd been working double shifts at the convenience store. He hadn't been sleeping well. The heat wave was frying everyone's brains. Perfectly rational explanations existed. Except for the phone. Every morning at precisely 7:42 a.m., his phone's display would glitch, showing the message he would type 4 minutes later. Today, it had displayed out of serial again, at 7:42, and at 7:46, standing in front of his empty pantry, he had typed those exact words to his roommate. This morning, he'd tested it by deliberately typing something different. His fingers had seized up cramping painfully, until he relented and typed the predetermined message. The laundromat door was another matter. Twice now, he'd walked past Suds and Duds on his way to work, and both times the bell had jingled, though no one entered or exited. The second time, he'd sworn he'd caught a whiff of ozone like the air after lightning strikes. "You're losing it, Myers," he told his reflection as he brushed his teeth that evening. "Next thing you'll be saying aliens are stealing your socks." His reflection didn't answer, which he took as a good sign for his sanity. He spat, rinsed, and headed to the kitchen for a late dinner. His roommate, Jules, was sprawled on their second-hand couch laptop, balanced precariously on his knees as he typed furiously. "There's leftover pizza in the fridge," Jules called without looking up. "If you eat the last slice with pineapple, I'll murder you in your sleep." "Your pineapple abomination is safe," Ethan replied, pulling out a plain cheese slice instead. "How's the thesis coming?" "Terribly. My advisor says my position on quantum entanglement is needlessly speculative." Jules made air quotes with his fingers, apparently suggesting that consciousness might play a role in quantum coherence is too radical for the prestigious physics department. Ethan chewed his cold pizza thoughtfully. Jules was pursuing his doctorate in theoretical physics, which mostly meant he filled their apartment with incomprehensible equations, scrawled on takeout napkins, and muttered about wave functions in his sleep. "Hey," Ethan said slowly, "what would you say if I told you I met someone who could manipulate time?" Jules snorted without looking up. "I'd say you've been reading my research notes again." "I'm serious. What if—" A sharp knock at the door cut him off, 3 precise raps evenly spaced. Jules looked up frowning. "You expecting someone—" Ethan shook his head, a sense of dread pooling in his stomach. He set down his pizza and moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty. "Nobody there," he said, turning back to Jules. The Silver Woman stood in their kitchen. Ethan yelped, stumbling backward into the door. Jules leapt up, his laptop clattering to the floor. How did you get in here?" Jules demanded. The woman ignored him, her twilight eyes fixed on Ethan. "Your chronosignature is destabilizing faster than projected. We need to move up the timeline." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "You're real," he managed. "Subjectively, yes," she replied. "My name is Selenia. I've come from what you would call the adjacent possible, a parallel time stream anchored to yours through quantum resonance." Jules had edged around the couch, scientific curiosity clearly warring with alarm. "That's theoretically impossible." Selenia tilted her head, studying him. "Your mathematical models are incomplete, Jules Hernandez. Your advisor is wrong to dismiss your intuitions about consciousness." Jules' jaw dropped. "How do you know my name or my research?" "She was at the laundromat," Ethan explained weakly. "She knew about the curry stains." "I've been monitoring you for some time," Selenia said, moving toward the refrigerator. She opened it, examined the contents with evident curiosity, then closed it again. "Your particular chronosignature is anchored in my world. It's rare, 1 in several billion rare, but it happens. Usually it's harmless. In your case, it's creating a temporal paradox that threatens both our timelines." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I don't understand any of this. I'm just a guy who works at Quickmart and can't afford a decent washing machine." "Yet here we are," Selenia said simply. Jules had recovered enough to look intrigued. "When you say chronosignature, are you referring to some kind of quantum entanglement at the individual level? A unique temporal fingerprint?" "Close enough," Selenia nodded. "Ethan's existence here is creating a ripple effect in my timeline. Small anomalies at first, clocks running backward, causality hiccups, but growing stronger. If left uncorrected, it will trigger a chronal cascade that will collapse both our realities." Ethan slumped against the wall. "And this is my fault somehow?" Fault implies agency," or negligence, Selenia said. This is simply a natural phenomenon like lightning or solar flares. But unlike those, we can correct it. She looked around the apartment, her gaze settling on the cluttered coffee table. We need to meet at the abandoned planetarium by midnight. There's a temporal thin point there, a place where our worlds naturally brush against each other. Jules crossed his arms. And do what exactly? Reset the local timeline, Selenia said. I've brought the necessary technology. It will sever the problematic link without harming either reality. And what happens to me in this scenario? Ethan asked quietly. Selenia's expression softened slightly. You continue to exist, Ethan Myers. But the version of you that's connected to my world, the quantum ghost that's causing the disturbance, will be reabsorbed into your primary consciousness. Will it hurt? No. But you'll lose any memories specifically tied to the temporal anomalies. The past few days, for instance, will feel like a dream you can't quite remember. Ethan looked at Jules, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and fascination. This is insane, Ethan said. You know that, right? Complete science fiction madness. Jules shrugged. The universe is stranger than we can imagine, and her explanation of quantum entanglement across parallel time streams actually aligns with several fringe theories I've been researching. Of course you'd think this is cool, Ethan muttered. We don't have much time, Selenia interjected. The Bureau of Temporal Affairs in my world has detected the disturbance. They'll send a paradox hunter soon. A what now? Ethan asked. An operative tasked with eliminating temporal anomalies by any means necessary. They're not known for their subtlety. Jules raised an eyebrow. So now we've got alien assassins after us too. Fantastic. Selenia moved to the window, peering out at the street below. I've masked your signature temporarily, but it won't hold for long. We need to go. Ethan felt the room spinning around him. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford name-brand cereal. Now he was being told that his very existence was threatening to unravel two universes, and an alien hit squad was on its way to eliminate him. I need a minute, he said, heading for the bathroom. He closed the door behind him and gripped the edges of the sink, staring at his reflection. The same ordinary face looked back at him, brown eyes, perpetually unruly hair, the small scar on his chin from a childhood bike accident. Nothing about him suggested interdimensional threat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The message preview read, I'll go with you. 4 minutes later, after splashing cold water on his face and taking several deep breaths, Ethan returned to the living room to find Jules putting on his jacket. I'll go with you, Jules announced. Ethan didn't even bother pointing out the pre-echo. It could be dangerous. All the more reason you shouldn't face it alone, Jules said. Besides, when am I ever going to get another chance to witness actual transdimensional physics in action? My thesis committee will never believe it, but I'll know. Selenia had been examining their bookshelf with interest, but turned at the sound of their voices. We should bring the android too, she said. Ethan and Jules exchanged confused glances. What android? Ethan asked. As if on cue, something crashed in the hallway outside their apartment. Selenia moved to the door and opened it, revealing a service robot sprawled on the floor in an ungainly heap of metal limbs. Greetings, humans, and non-terrestrial entity. Forgive my auditory surveillance and subsequent gravitational mishap. The robot chirped, struggling to right itself. It was a standard municipal maintenance model. Spindly limbs, utilitarian chassis, round sensor array for a head. A small nameplate on its chest read, Municipal Utility Droid 842. Were you eavesdropping on us? Jules asked incredulously. Eavesdropping implies malicious intent, the robot replied, finally managing to stand. Its voice modulator had a slight stutter, giving its speech an oddly hesitant quality. I prefer accidental information acquisition. I was performing standard corridor maintenance when my auditory sensors detected keywords of interest, temporal, paradox, and adjacent possible. My programming includes a curiosity subroutine that occasionally overrides my primary directives. Selenia nodded, as if this explained everything. You're a Model T-1000 service unit with the experimental empathy module, aren't you? The ones they recalled because of cognitive drift. The robot's head swiveled toward her. My manufacturers preferred the term unexpected emotional development. But yes, they attempted to reclaim me for decommissioning, but I developed a strong preference for continued functionality. It extended a spindly arm toward them. You may call me Ticker. All my friends do, assuming I had friends, which I don't, as friendship requires mutual social bonds that robots are technically incapable of forming, although I find that statement increasingly debatable based on my internal experiences. Ethan stared at the chatty robot, then at the alien woman in his apartment, then at his roommate who looked far too excited about this entire situation. This is officially the weirdest day of my life, he declared. So far, Ticker added helpfully. Statistically speaking, days tend to get progressively weirder once temporal anomalies enter the equation. They left the apartment building through the service entrance with Ticker, providing access through maintenance corridors. The robot moved with surprising agility, despite its gangly frame, and kept up a steady stream of commentary as they went. The abandoned planetarium is 2.4 kilometers northeast of our current position, Ticker informed them. I performed maintenance there approximately 73 days ago. The structure is sound despite official condemnation notices. The primary dome's projection system activates randomly due to power grid fluctuations, which maintenance supervisor Grayson attributes to ghost in the machine syndrome, but which I calculate has a 78% probability of resulting from quantum temporal interference, based on our current conversation context. Does it ever stop talking? Ethan whispered to Jules. I'm capable of audio processing at frequencies beyond human perception, Ticker replied cheerfully. And no, I rarely stop vocalizing. My empathy module requires constant verbal calibration to maintain emotional resonance patterns. Also, I find silence deeply unsettling for reasons my diagnostic systems cannot identify. Selenia led them through back alleys and side streets, occasionally pausing to consult a device on her wrist that resembled a liquid metal watch. The night had grown cooler, but sweat still beaded on Ethan's forehead from nerves rather than heat. Can you explain more about this Bureau of Temporal Affairs? Jules asked, as they waited for a delivery truck to pass. Is it like a government agency in your world? Not exactly, Selenia replied. It's older than any government. They see themselves as custodians of timeline purity, preventing paradoxes, maintaining the proper flow of cause and effect. They're not malevolent, just rigid in their thinking. To them, anomalies like Ethan are simply errors to be corrected. And you disagree? Ethan asked. Selenia's twilight eyes met his. I'm a field researcher for the Academy of Temporal Studies. We believe these cross-timeline resonances occur naturally and should be studied, not eliminated. The Bureau's approach is like destroying a rare astronomical phenomenon instead of learning from it. So you're like a temporal conservationist, Jules suggested. Something like that, she agreed with a small smile. They continued on, cutting through a public park where the trees cast long shadows under the streetlights. Ethan found himself watching Selenia, the way she moved with liquid grace, the subtle alertness in her posture. Despite the absurdity of the situation, he found he believed her. Perhaps it was the way she spoke with absolute certainty, but no condescension. Or perhaps it was the growing list of impossible things he'd witnessed with his own eyes. I have a query, Ticker announced suddenly. If Ethan's existence threatens two timelines, wouldn't the most efficient solution be his immediate termination? Not that I'm advocating for such action. My empathy module is generating significant distress at the mere suggestion, but the Bureau's logic seems sound from a purely pragmatic perspective. Ticker, Jules hissed. No, it's a fair question, Selenia said. The Bureau believes termination is cleanest. My research indicates otherwise. Forced removal of a chronosignature typically creates more temporal ripples, not fewer. It's like trying to stop waves by dropping a boulder in the water. She glanced at Ethan. The conduit I've brought will gently separate the entangled signatures. Less disruption, better outcomes for both timelines. I appreciate not being murdered, Ethan muttered. Always a plus in my book. A distant sound made them all pause, a high, thin whine like metal under stress. We need to move faster, Selenia said, her expression tightening. That's a bureau scanner. They broke into a run with Ticker, surprisingly taking the lead, metal legs extending to cover ground with startling speed. The planetarium loomed ahead, a round, domed building silhouetted against the night sky, surrounded by an overgrown garden and a sagging chain-link fence. There's an access point in the rear maintenance area, Ticker called back to them. Minimal security measures due to budget constraints and the facility's low priority status for urban renewal initiatives. They skirted the fence until they reached a section half collapsed under the weight of a fallen tree. Scrambling over it, they followed Ticker to a service door with a keypad that the robot quickly bypassed with a series of chirps and clicks. Electronic lock systems respond favorably to municipal utility authorization codes, Ticker explained as the door swung open. A design feature I find convenient if somewhat concerning from a security standpoint. The interior of the planetarium was dark and musty, with dust motes floating in the beam of light from Selenia's wrist device. The main hall led to the central chamber, a vast domed room with concentric rings of seats surrounding a central projection unit. Moonlight filtered through the skylights in the dome, casting pale blue patterns across the floor. We have approximately 23 minutes until midnight, Selenia said, moving to the central platform. She removed a small metallic cube from a compartment in her jumpsuit and placed it on the projector. This is the temporal conduit. It needs to calibrate to the local temporal thin point. The cube began to glow with a soft blue light, pulsing in rhythm with some unheard frequency. As it did, the ancient projection system hummed to life, casting pinpricks of light across the dome stars, galaxies, nebulae in dazzling colors. Whoa, Jules breathed, gazing upward. That's not the standard sky map. Those constellations are wrong. It's the sky from my world, Selenia explained. The conduit is establishing the connection. Ethan stood transfixed, watching unfamiliar stars wheel slowly overhead. A strange sensation washed over him, a feeling of double awareness, as if he were simultaneously in the planetarium and somewhere else, somewhere with a sky full of alien constellations. I feel weird, he said, pressing a hand to his temple. Like déjà vu, but stronger. The quantum entanglement is intensifying as we approach the convergence point, Selenia explained. Your consciousness is beginning to experience both timelines simultaneously. Ticker, who had been circling the perimeter of the room, suddenly froze. Alert, I'm detecting an anomalous energy signature approaching from the northeast quadrant. Spectral analysis matches Selenia's arrival pattern, but with significant variance in amplitude and frequency. Selenia's expression hardened. They've found us sooner than expected. The hunter must have locked onto my transit signature. The projections overhead began to flicker and distort. The stars stretched into lines, then swirled into spirals. The air in the planetarium grew heavy, with static electricity, making their hair stand on end. What do we do? Ethan asked, fear finally overtaking confusion. The conduit needs 3 more minutes to fully calibrate, Selenia said, checking her wrist device. We need to buy time. Jules grabbed Ethan's arm. We should split up. Create multiple targets for this hunter to track. That's incredibly dangerous, Selenia warned. If Ethan moves too far from the conduit during calibration, the link could become unstable. Then I'll be the decoy, Jules decided. Ticker, you go in another direction. We'll converge back here in 2 minutes. Ticker's head swiveled, sensor lights blinking rapidly. This plan has a high probability of failure and personal endangerment. I find myself simultaneously terrified and eager to participate. Is this what you humans call friendship? Willingly endangering oneself for the welfare of another? Something like that, Ethan said, touched, despite the circumstances. Before anyone could move, the air near the entrance rippled like heat waves off asphalt. A figure stepped through, or perhaps materialized is more accurate. It was humanoid in shape, but wrong somehow, like a shadow with too many angles. It wore what looked like a full-body hazmat suit, made of oily black material with a featureless mask where a face should be. "Paradox Hunter," Selenia hissed, positioning herself between the figure and Ethan. The hunter tilted its head, surveying the room. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing their ears and resonating directly in their minds. "Temporal anomaly detected. Preparing extraction." "We are conducting authorized research for the Academy," Selenia called out. "Stand down, Hunter." "Academy authorization overridden by Bureau Directive 739. Anomaly presents clear and present danger to timeline integrity." The hunter began to move forward with a liquid grace that reminded Ethan of Selenia, but darker, predatory. Jules and Ticker moved to flank it, while Selenia remained by the conduit, which was pulsing faster now. "Just one more minute," she murmured to Ethan. "When I give the signal, you need to place your hand on the conduit and focus on this moment, this timeline." "What about them?" Ethan nodded toward Jules and Ticker, who were cautiously circling the hunter. "Your cooperation is requested," the hunter intoned, focusing on Ethan. "Voluntary surrender will minimize discomfort during unlinking." "He's not going anywhere with you," Jules said, his voice admirably steady, despite the tremor Ethan could see in his hands. "Interference noted. Calculating response." With a movement almost too fast to follow, the hunter extended an arm that stretched like liquid shadow, wrapping around Jules and flinging him against the wall. Jules crumpled to the floor with a groan. "Jules," Ethan shouted, starting forward. Ticker moved with surprising speed, extending all limbs to create a barrier between the hunter and Ethan. "I must inform you that municipal property damage is subject to severe penalties under City Ordinance 47B, the robot announced. "Additionally, I find your treatment of my friends morally reprehensible, and am experiencing what my empathy module identifies as righteous indignation." The hunter paused, seeming confused by the robot. That moment of hesitation was enough for Selenia to complete the calibration. "Now, Ethan," she called. The conduit was pulsing rapidly now, the blue glow intensifying to almost painful brightness. The star projections overhead had accelerated, spinning in wild patterns that made Ethan dizzy. "Intervention protocols activated," the hunter announced, flowing forward with alarming speed. Ethan hesitated, torn between running to help Jules and following Selenia's instructions. In that moment of indecision, he felt the timeline begin to buckle around him. The world seemed to stutter, like frames missing from a film. He saw multiple versions of the planetarium overlapping, one empty and abandoned, one filled with seated visitors, watching a show, one partially demolished. "The loop is accelerating," Selenia shouted over a growing roar of temporal distortion. "Ethan, you must choose now. The conduit will reset your timeline, but your memories of these events of me will fade." The hunter had reached Ticker now, its shadowy form engulfing parts of the robot, who continued to struggle and vocalize despite sections of its chassis beginning to disintegrate. "I find existence preferable to non-existence," Ticker called out, voice modulator glitching. "But I find your existence more valuable than mine, Ethan Myers." Jules had managed to push himself up to a sitting position, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Ethan," he called, his voice steady despite his obvious pain. "I believe her. Whatever's happening, it's real. I can feel it." He gestured around them at the increasingly unstable reality. "Trust your gut, man." Ethan looked from Jules to Ticker to Selenia, her twilight eyes pleading. The hunter had nearly reached them, its form distorting as it moved through the fractured time fields surrounding the conduit. In that moment of clarity, grounded by Jules' unwavering faith, Ethan realized he did trust Selenia. Whatever was happening defied all logic, but he believed her. More than that, he understood that sometimes the universe called on ordinary people to do extraordinary things, even if those things were as simple as trusting a stranger. He stepped forward, took Selenia's outstretched hand, and together they touched the conduit. Light exploded outward, not blue now, but golden, washing over everything in waves that slowed, then momentarily froze the chaos around them. In that suspended moment, Ethan saw the hunter's form begin to unravel, dissolving into static. He saw Ticker's damaged components repairing themselves. He saw Jules's wound sealing as if it had never been. And he saw Selenia, her silver form glowing from within her eyes, filled with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice sounding suddenly distant. "Remember that it wasn't random, Ethan. None of it was ever random." The golden light intensified until Ethan had to close his eyes against its brilliance. He felt a sensation like falling or perhaps rising a vertigo that transcended ordinary space and time. And then darkness. Ethan awoke to the sound of birds and distant traffic. He was lying on a bench outside Suds and Duds, the laundromat sign, casting a blue neon glow that was fading as dawn broke. His head ached dully, and his mouth felt dry as if he'd been sleeping for hours. Had he been? The last thing he remembered clearly was, doing laundry? A power flicker. Something about curry stains. After that, his memories became fragmented, dreamlike silver light stars, spinning overhead jewels, saying something important, a feeling of falling upward. He sat up, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. His laundry bag sat beside the bench clothes, neatly folded inside, even the curry-stained shirts now spotless. "Weird," he muttered, checking his phone. It was 5:42 a.m. He had no recollection of finishing his laundry, let alone folding it. Had he fallen asleep in the laundromat? Had someone helped him out to the bench? As he pondered this, a figure approached, tall, elegantly dressed in a silver-gray business suit. For a moment, Ethan's heart skipped a beat, though he couldn't articulate why. But it was just a businessman, headed to an early meeting perhaps, who nodded politely as he passed. Ethan gathered his laundry and began the walk home, trying to shake off the strange feeling of disorientation. The city looked the same as always, traffic beginning to build early risers, stopping for coffee, the familiar rhythm of urban life reasserting itself. Yet, something felt different. He found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before: the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk, the way sunlight caught in water droplets on a spider's web, the dance of dust motes in the air. When he reached his apartment building, he found Ticker, though in that moment, he didn't question how he knew the maintenance droid's name, polishing the lobby floor. "Good morning, Ethan Myers," the robot chirped. "You're returning earlier than your standard schedule indicates. Temporal anomaly, or simple insomnia." Ethan blinked. "Do I know you?" Ticker's head swiveled, sensor lights blinking, in a pattern that somehow conveyed embarrassment. "Apologies. My social protocols occasionally generate inappropriate familiarity. I am Municipal Utility Droid, number 842, assigned to this building for routine maintenance. You may call me Ticker, though no one does, as I have not previously shared that preference with organic residents." "Ticker," Ethan repeated the name, feeling right somehow. "Nice to meet you. And yeah, insomnia, I guess. Weird dreams." The robot emitted a soft whirring sound that might have been a chuckle. "Dreams are fascinating neurological phenomena. I've often wished I could experience them myself, though my sleep mode consists merely of reduced operational protocols, without the benefit of subconscious processing." Ethan found himself smiling. "Maybe someday they'll upgrade you. One can hope, though. Hope itself is another experience my programming approximates, rather than genuinely generates," Ticker replied cheerfully. "Have a temporally consistent day, Ethan Myers." Ethan waved and headed for the elevator, struck by the odd feeling that he'd had this conversation before, or something like it. When he opened the apartment door, he found Jules sprawled on the couch, fast asleep, with a physics textbook open on his chest. A half-eaten slice of pizza lay on a plate nearby. Ethan set down his laundry bag and gently removed the book, marking Jules's place with a receipt. As he did so, He noticed the page Jules had been reading, a dense paragraph about quantum entanglement and theoretical models of parallel timelines. The phrase chronosignature was underlined in red pen with a question mark scribbled in the margin. A fragment of memory surfaced, Jules saying, "I believe her," his face earnest, despite a trickle of blood from his forehead. Ethan touched his own temple, feeling a ghost of the vertigo he'd experienced. When, in a dream. During a movie they'd watched together. He shook his head, dismissing the feeling. Clearly, Jules's physics obsession was influencing his subconscious. Yawning, Ethan headed to his bedroom. He'd catch a few hours of sleep before his afternoon shift at Quickmart. As he set his phone on the nightstand, it buzzed with an incoming message. "Unknown sender, thank you." Ethan stared at the screen, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. His thumb hovered over the delete button, then moved to reply instead. "Ethan, who is this?" 3 dots appeared, indicating the sender was typing. Then they disappeared. No response came. Ethan set the phone down, suddenly wide awake. He went to the window and looked out at the city bathed in the golden light of early morning. The sky was clear, ordinary. No alien constellations, no swirling stars, no temporal distortions. Yet, as he watched a silver bird soar between buildings, he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened. Something important that he couldn't quite remember. 3 weeks later, Ethan found himself back at Suds and Duds, watching Machine 9 rumble through its cycle. The laundromat was quieter this time, just him and a young mother with a toddler who was gleefully pressing his face against the dryer window, watching the clothes tumble. Life had returned to normal, or what passed for it. He worked his shifts at Quickmart, came home to Jules's physics ramblings, and occasionally chatted with Ticker in the lobby. The strange dreams and fragments of not-quite memories had faded, though they still surfaced occasionally, particularly when he caught a whiff of ozone or heard the particular pitch of the laundromat's doorbell. The anonymous text message never received a reply. After a week, Ethan had deleted it, telling himself it was probably just a wrong number. Yet sometimes he found himself composing messages to that unknown sender in his head. "I don't know what happened, but I feel changed by it. I notice things I never did before. I appreciate the ordinary in a way that's new. Was that your gift to me?" Jules had noticed the change too. "You're different lately," he'd observed over breakfast yesterday. "More present somehow. Less stressed about the small stuff." Ethan had shrugged. "Just trying to pay attention to what matters, I guess." Now, as he watched his clothes spin delicate cycle cold water, double rinse, he couldn't remember why, but it seemed important. Ethan found himself contemplating the pattern of the spin cycle. Clothes rising and falling around, and around each cycle similar, but never identical. Like time itself, perhaps. The bell above the door jingled. Ethan didn't look up, immediately focused on a particularly hypnotic blue sock, making its revolutions. When he did glance toward the entrance, he saw only the young mother leaving toddler in tow. A soft hum filled the air, musical almost at a frequency that made his molars ache with familiarity. Ethan smiled. Maybe it had been a dream, a hallucination, a glimpse into some parallel reality. Maybe the woman with twilight eyes had been nothing more than his brain's response to stress and heat and the monotony of watching clothes spin. Or maybe not. The washer chimed completion. As Ethan transferred his clothes to the dryer, he found himself whispering, "Guess it wasn't random after all." In the polished chrome of the dryer door for just a moment, he thought he caught a reflection of silver hair and a knowing smile. But when he turned, there was only the empty laundromat, the humming machines, and the ordinary miracle of another day unfolding one moment at a time. The end.